I'd like to welcome everyone and welcome those who are watching on the dreaded Zoom. May you be well and happy on Zoom, as I hope we are here in the library. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So welcome everyone again. This is the second evening to try to talk a little bit about patience. It's such a big topic that really it's easy to become impatient with wanting to get through a whole lot of material. So one has to restrain oneself and just try to do a little bit that might be useful. So thinking about tonight is a very special night, of course, because tonight is Holy Thursday in Holy Week in the Christian tradition, and in this tradition, this is the night when Christ celebrated the Last Supper and then went to the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples, and he went off to a little quiet spot to pray, and they all went to sleep. And he came back and said, "Can't you even watch for 1 hour with me?" Yeah. And they did it again. So his patience was tried. And the Buddha's patience was also tried by his disciples. And we know there's the famous incident where he turns to Ananda and says, "Your questions are really vexatious to me." In other words, your questions drive me crazy. Yeah. So these teachers, and Thich Nhat Hanh has a very similar story. These teachers also experience impatience, but it's how they deal with it. That's the important thing. So on this particular night, it's very appropriate that we have a think about that, and it's also appropriate to recall death and dying at this time of the year as well. And when it comes to thinking about patience, we should also remind ourselves that we're all heading towards death, no matter what, no matter how old we are, no matter how young we are. Sister Sudhira told me that today is the 52nd anniversary of her father's death. Sue told me her aunt, who was an amazing woman, died a week ago, wasn't it, Sue? At 103. Wonderful. Did she get a telegram from the Queen, by the way? Oh, good. Okay. Excellent. All right. So she should. I suppose I'd like to start by suggesting to you that when we think about patience and we kind of think, oh, how should we practice patience? Well, the very first place to practice patience is right here. Yeah, you've got the best thing to practice patience with, and it's called a body. Because very often we'd like to escape the body, or we get fed up with the body, or we get sick of the body, or the body gets sick and lets us down. That's the way we think about it. But the location for practicing patience is this body, no matter what's happening to it. And the time for practicing patience is this time, is now. It's not, not when I get home and I'll do a special meditation on patience. No, it's right now. And last week I tried to, pardon me, I tried to make the emphasis, and I really still want to stick with that, the emphasis on the role of patience in meditation practice. Yeah, it really does require developing and cultivating and practicing patience in your meditation practice. Yeah, because otherwise you're just, digging a hole under yourself all the time. you know, especially if you're giving into thoughts like it should be like this, it should be like that, I should be here, I should be there. And the truth is you're nowhere. You're just here in this, with this body, with this heart and mind. Yeah. And if you're trying to move away from it all the time, well, you're not practicing patience. You know? And you can only deal with that this one moment now. You know? Now, Thich Nhat Hanh, who I must say, as the years go on, I admire more and more and more. He had a lovely teaching which he gave in, I think, in 2012, something like that. It's quite a long time ago, in which he talked about the importance of patience. And he used the example of the teaching that the Buddha gave to his son, Rahula. And I know most of you remember this because I've given this teaching to you, or this sutta to you. It's the teaching of the Buddha, not mine, where the Buddha takes Rahula aside. And I'll just read parts of it to you. It begins, it's called the Maha Rahula Awada Sutta. So the great sutta of advice to Rahula, given by the Buddha. And it begins, I've heard that on one occasion, the Blessed One was staying at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then the Blessed One early in the morning adjusted his lower robe and taking his bowl and outer robe went into Savatthi for alms. And Venerable Rahula early in the morning adjusted his lower robe and taking his bowl and outer robe went into Savatthi for alms, following right behind the Blessed One. So we get this lovely image of the Buddha setting out to go on alms round and Rahula sort of going along behind, almost like a little cartoon character behind the Buddha, you know, literally following in the Buddha's footsteps. Then the Blessed One, looking back at Rahula, addressed him. Rahula, any form whatsoever that is past, future or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every form is to be seen as it has come to be with the right discernment as this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. So they're very powerful words addressed to Rahula, who you can see in the context of this little story is in a way trying to sort of imitate the Buddha, yeah? Follow along behind, you know. And after all, the Buddha was his father, so I suppose there was an element of, you know, following dad, that sort of thing. And then the Buddha runs through all the things, form, Rahula, feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness. Yeah, these are not myself, these are not mine. Yeah. And then Rahula, it says, poor old Rahula, it says, having been exhorted face to face by the Blessed One, thought to himself, who could possibly go into town today? so like, oh, I can't go to town, you know. So he turns around and he goes back and sits at the foot of a tree, folding his legs crosswise, holding his body erect and establishing mindfulness in front of himself. So Rahula is so embarrassed or mortified by this dressing down in a way by the Buddha that he just packs up and goes back and sits down to do his meditation practice. Then Sariputta sees him and goes to him and says, Rahula, develop the meditation of mindfulness of in and out breathing. This meditation, when developed and pursued, is of great fruit, is of great benefit. So Rahula tries to do this practice. And then it says, Rahula emerging from his seclusion in the evening, so he spent the whole day sitting there. Yeah. Now, if it was maybe one of us, we'd be ticking off the points, you know. Oh, 3 hours. Yeah. Yeah, I must be getting good points for that. I kid you not, I've known monks who do that, who they're almost like, oh yeah, okay, I sat for 5 hours. And I told you about the monk who had pressure sores on his bum in Thailand, and who said to me, he was living in a funny little monastery at the back of Koh Samui in Thailand. And he said to me, everyone admires me, the villagers. He was the only monk living in this place. And he said, everyone admires me because I just sit all day, you know. And I said, oh, and he said, yes, look. And he lifted up the back of his sabong and he said, I've got pressure sores. And I thought, yeah, and you've got loose marbles in your head as well. He also told me that his plan was to go back to America and get a motorbike and go around teaching Dhamma. Who knows where he finished up? Anyway, an interesting aside. So poor old Rahula, he stops in the evening and he goes to the Buddha and he sits to one side. And as he was sitting to one side, he said to the Buddha, how is mindfulness of in and out breathing to be developed and pursued so as to be of great fruit and benefit? And then the Buddha begins to repeat the teaching that he gave him in the morning, right? But he then breaks down our experience, Rahula's experience of having a body into the elements, earth, air, fire, water, and so on. And he says to him, what are the properties of water, for example? He says, whatever they are, right? This is not you. It's not, doesn't belong to you. Then we get to the part of the teaching that Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh used in that early teaching of his at Plum Village. The Buddha doesn't mention meditation on the breath at this stage. He's talking about what is this body? What's my experience of myself? And then he says, Rahula, develop the meditation in tune with the earth. And he does this beautiful, wow, it's a strange noise, isn't it? Yeah, oh, maybe, yeah. I thought it might be the Chinese embassy getting ready to do something. So he says, develop meditation in tune with the earth. For when you are developing the meditation in tune with the earth, agreeable and disagreeable sensory impressions that have arisen will not stay and take hold of your mind. And why? And this is a beautiful teaching. He says, because just as when people throw what is clean or unclean on the earth, whether it's feces, urine, saliva, pus, or blood, the earth is not horrified. The earth is not humiliated. The earth is not disgusted. In the same way, when you're developing meditation in tune with the earth, agreeable and disagreeable sensory impressions that have arisen will not take control of your mind, your heart mind, your chitta. So he uses this very solid, practical example, of what is all around all of us, of people throwing things onto the earth, onto the ground, and how the earth does not react to these things, right? It's us who react to these things. Yeah. So the Buddha's saying, okay, try to make your meditation practice like that. And that, of course, requires the exercise or the cultivation or development of patience. Yeah? To be able just to support whatever comes up. Last week, I think it was Nicola was asking about renunciation. And I pointed out to you that nekama, the term, does not mean renunciation in the way that we use it in English. Nekama actually means I just won't pick something up. I'm not pushing it away because that would be a kind of aversion, get over there. But I'm just saying, well, okay, yeah, that's fine, but I'm not picking it up. It doesn't belong to me. I'm not putting it in my pocket, so to speak, whether that pocket is literal or metaphor. And then the Buddha, in this teaching, the Buddha goes through the elements, the same with water. He says, when people throw things into water, the water doesn't sort of react and become horrified and that sort of stuff. And he says the same with fire, the same with the wind, and the same with space itself. So he gives this teaching, which is if you think about it, it's very, very concrete, and it encourages us to just sit, to use the image of these elements to, in a sense, stabilize and center our meditation practice. To try and make it, okay, let me try to sit like the earth, to sit like water, to sit like fire, and of course to make it, as the Buddha says, make your meditation in tune with space, which is vast and spacious and open and empty. Whereas there's a great temptation in meditation and especially in different schools of Buddhism to turn meditation into something that's quite competitive and that has a set of very sort of formal steps, like, okay, now you do this, now you do this, now you do something else, and now, you know, it's 3 o'clock, so you should be at this stage. Yeah. Whereas the Buddha's saying, no, forget about all that. Just try to stabilize your practice by using these images, if you like, and by recognizing that these elements are here. Yeah, they're not sort of out there somewhere. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh's always talking about how, you know, people talk about the earth, the earth, the earth, and he says, wake up, because what are you talking about? You're talking about this. Yeah, it's not just the earth that's there. You know, when he does walking meditation, he says to people, you know, feel the earth, feel the earth, feel the earth, feel the earth. Yeah, here. So the Buddha's giving this instruction about the elements. Then he says, develop meditation on loving kindness. So he hasn't got anywhere near breath yet. Right? It's very interesting, you know, when he's teaching Rahula, his own son. Develop meditation on loving kindness, because when you develop this, ill will be abandoned. Ill will be let go of. And then, of course, you know what's coming because you're familiar with it. Develop meditation on compassion. Yeah? So, of course, he's talking about the Brahma Viharas. Yeah? But when you're developing the meditation on compassion, harmfulness will be abandoned. Yeah? And notice in this translation, the idea of it'll be abandoned. It'll just be let go of. Yeah? It won't be locked in a box somewhere. It'll just be let go of. You know, you won't need it anymore. You'll see that it's not who you are. Then develop meditation on sympathetic joy, which is a very unfortunate translation of mudita. And then finally, develop meditation on equanimity, because when you develop this, the Buddha says, all irritation will be abandoned. Right? So irritation, of course, brings us back to patience. Yeah. Because patience is the great antidote to irritation and anger and resentment, which often, I mentioned to you last week, we actually have very often for ourselves. Yeah? We're often irritated with ourselves. We're often angry with ourselves. And we're often very impatient with ourselves. And I even was rude enough to suggest to you that if you get really impatient with other people, you need to hold the mirror up and see that you're probably actually really impatient with yourself. Yeah? You're unhappy with yourself. I remember giving a Dhamma talk once for Khanti in his centre in Cairns. And we went up to, I think it was, what's it called? It's up in the hills behind Cairns. Yeah. And we did this Dhamma talk. I can't even remember what it was about now. And coming back down, he said something to me, and I said, I was really disappointed with that talk. And he said to me, without even blinking, no, you were disappointed with yourself. And he was quite right. So in this teaching, then finally the Buddha goes on to talk about how to practice meditation on the breath. Yeah. So he doesn't start off with poor Rahula by saying, okay, sit down, you know, do this, do that. Here's a copy of my Satipatthana Sutta. You better read this, you know. No, he takes him right back to the fundamentals, to the basics. Yeah. Says use this body, use the experience of the body, the elements of the body, and practice with those. Yeah. And if you do it, seriously, if you do it, if you take the Buddha at his word and you try to apply it, you will find that you will develop equanimity. It's just the most natural thing. It just arises, and patience will arise with it. Yeah, because I don't know. This is a psychological term, I think. It'll be non-reactive. Is that right? Yeah, be non-reactive. See. Anyway, you know what I mean. That we're actually able just to sit with it. Now, in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, which I gave you a few verses from last week, this is, I think, one of the really great texts in the Buddhist tradition. This is it's quite old now, a little paperback, but there are a number of translations, And one of the really nice ones with a commentary is by Pema Chodron, and it's called No Time to Lose. Yeah? And it has quite a nice picture of her on the front. And if you've seen a picture of her recently, she's right. There's no time to lose because she's looking really old now. Sorry, Pema Chodron. This text has, as chapter 6, it has a chapter called Patience or Forbearance. Right? It's a wonderful, wonderful chapter. You could take that and you could work with it for weeks and weeks and weeks, just reading a little tiny bit at a time. So I thought we might have a look at that. But first, I want to go back to the story that Frank mentioned last week, the story of Khanti, which many of you know already, but it's such a great story. I think it's worth having a look at. So where is it? See, I've done it again. I think it's here. I don't really need to read the whole thing out. No, there you are. It's not there. Talk about the need for patience. So let me just tell you the story then. What? Oh, it doesn't matter. So this is a story that comes from the Jatakas. Yeah. And I mentioned to you last week how someone said to me once, "Oh, I don't like the Jatakas. They're silly." Yeah. Well, they're not silly at all. They're very, very insightful. So in this story, we run across a person who's trying to develop spiritually and trying to practice meditation and so on. And his name is Khanti. Yeah? Literally would mean something like the way of patience, or it could even mean the footsteps of patience. And so he goes off into the forest to meditate. And remember last week I said to you, the forest is this forest, the forest of the heart and the mind. Yeah, you don't need to go and look for a forest somewhere else. There's a great, huge forest right here, much vaster than the Amazon, much darker, much more dangerous. So Khanti in the story, remember all these stories, they're filled with wonderful metaphors and similes. So he goes to the forest and he sits down and he starts to meditate. Beautiful. And then the local king, who's a bit of a despot, who perhaps could be living in Canberra at the moment, but the local king comes with all his wives, because they've always got a lot of wives, a bit like Canberra too, and they go to the forest to have a picnic, right? And the king gets drunk. Gosh, it's getting worse, isn't it? The king gets drunk and he falls to sleep, and the wives get up and start exploring the forest. They're going to have a look at the flowers and the vines and the animals, and they come across Khanti, who's sitting in meditation. And they're so impressed by this person that they sit down to watch him, to observe him. And the king wakes up in a drunken stupor, and he says to his entourage, "Where are all my wives? What's going on here? Where have they gone to?" And they say, "Oh, they wandered off into the forest over there." So he gathers up his bodyguard and they go looking for the wives, and they find the wives all sitting there very quietly, staring at this person who's sitting in meditation. And the king then addresses Khanti and says, "Do you know who I am? I'm a very important person." And of course, Khanti doesn't answer. He's deep in his meditation practice. So then the king gets pretty nasty and starts cutting Khanti to pieces. Yeah. So this is it always reminds me of Monty Python and the black, was it the Black Knight? Where they, his arms get cut off and then his legs get cut off and then he's just a torso, and he says, "Come back here, you chicken," and fight. So the king begins dismembering Khanti, and the wives are horrified, of course. And the king is getting more and more and more furious because he's getting no reaction from Khanti. And then finally cuts his head off. And then when he does this in the story, one of the gods sees this and the earth opens up and the king falls down into the deepest hell realm. And then the god, whether it's the same one or a different one, reassembles Khanti and puts him back together. And then everyone's terribly impressed, and he goes on to live and to keep practicing in this way. Now, you can see, Blind Freddy can see what the story's talking about, yeah? Because the Buddha also has that sutta called the simile of the saw. Remember where he says, even if someone cuts you up with a saw, if you react to it, then you've lost something, yeah? You don't really have patience. You don't really have that proper kind of centeredness. So in this little story, Khanti allows this dismemberment to take place for the sake of preserving, if you like, the patience that he's practicing. Now, of course, it's not to be literalized. That would be quite crazy. So you go home tonight and say to someone, well, here's a jigsaw, start cutting me up. Not at all. But you can see what it's getting at. Now, I'd suggest to you too that it should be internalized. So you should think about, do you sometimes behave towards yourself like the king does towards Khanti? Yeah, and you start, as I said to you last week when I was telling you about my teacher and that person that I took to see him, where he said, oh, your problem is that your heart is absolutely bound up with twine or with string. Yeah. And what you need to do is you need to go into the forest of the heart. And he said, you can't cut that string. So you can't go in there with a machete. You have to unwind it. You unwind it, unwind it, unwind it. And then when you've done that, he says, you've got two things very useful, a ball of string and a free heart. So Khanti teaches us that. And I think it's good to think about it externally, but it's also much more important to think about it inwardly. How do I approach my practice? Because if I approach my practice in that way, I'm going to be much better at being with other people, which after all is really what it's about. Yeah? If there were no other people in the world, if you were the only being that existed in the world, you wouldn't have to worry about anything. You could just float around and it'd be pretty boring, but still. The whole point of it, as the Buddha says, the whole point of my teaching, all of my teaching is about this good companionship, loving kindness with others. So if we practice in this way, if we develop patience in this way, then we transform ourselves, but we also transform our interactions with others. It begins to change, and we can let go then of that kind of criticizing, which is a reflection of our own dis-ease with ourselves. Yeah. And that's it. I'm not trying to kid you. It's very difficult to do, yeah, because we're so, I hesitate to use the word, but I'll say conditioned, yeah, by ourselves and by others, I suppose, and by the society or the culture we live in. We're so conditioned to do that all the time. We're always busy comparing ourselves with others. And remember, I'm sure most of you will remember, the Buddha says, don't say that you're less than others. Don't say that you're better than others. And then the best one of all, don't say that you're equal to others. So it gives you nowhere to put your feet. Yeah. Don't start talking about, I'm like that character in Dickens, I'm so humble, I forget who it is now. Yeah, I'm so humble. So wonderful, isn't it? Don't be like that. And on the other hand, don't be, I'm better than everyone else. I mean, you run into that often enough. But then you kind of think, as ordinary human beings, we kind of think, no, especially Australians. Oh no, we're all equal. Yeah? And the Buddha says, no, don't say that you're equal to others. Yeah? So it gives you nowhere, so to speak, to plonk yourself. The self with a big S. Yeah? So it forces you in a way to think in a different way. So in the teaching by Shantideva, which truly, if you haven't read it, I really suggest that you get a copy. There are PDF copies on the internet now. I think the Stephen Batchelor one you can get as a PDF on the internet. There are certainly a couple of them. Have a look. Get the chapter on patience, which is chapter 6. And have a read of it slowly, right? And the chapter opens with this wonderful line. It says, whatever wholesome deeds, such as venerating the Buddhas and generosity, interesting combination, that have been amassed over 1,000 eons will all be destroyed in one moment of anger. So that's how it begins. Yeah. So no matter how much you've developed, yeah, all the good things you've developed, you can wreck them with one moment of anger. Yeah. Now, I think, stepping back a little bit from how huge that statement is, I think we all recognize this in our interrelationships with others, that there are times when we've become angry with someone and ruined a relationship with somebody, or they've been angry with us and we've allowed that to ruin the relationship. Yeah. And then afterwards we kind of think, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have perhaps not reacted in that sort of way, and so on. So it doesn't have to be, Shantideva it's sort of grandiose, I suppose. It's very vast, and because he's talking about the wholesome deeds involving venerating the Buddhas and generosity and so on. But we can touch on that experience just in our ordinary day-to-day life. Yeah. And I know for myself, I've certainly done it in the past with people. I can remember people who were very, very good friends, and then they did something, and then I just said, oh, that's it. No more. Yeah. And I still think about it today. What a fool, yeah, to react in that sort of way. He goes on and says, there's no evil like hatred, and there's no fortitude like patience. Yeah. So he really sort of puts them there, as sort of polar opposites. No evil like hatred, and no fortitude like patience. And so I should strive in various ways to meditate on patience. So this is the first two verses in that chapter. So he's pointing out how anger, or losing control in that way, or allowing oneself to be, if you like, consumed by the fire of anger, how destructive it can be and how much damage it can do. And he says, well, okay, so then what I should do is I should try to practice or meditate on patience. And then in the third verse, he says, my mind will not experience peace if it fosters painful thoughts. I shall find no joy or happiness, and I'll be unable to sleep. I shall feel unsettled. Now, we all know that experience as human beings. Yeah, when things have happened, especially involving anger or irritation or annoyance, or, I still remember, and I'm sure you do too. I still remember one person that I worked for, who was a boss, who I thought was a complete idiot. And he proved that he was a complete idiot, but I did not need to react in the way that I did. And I didn't need to, so to speak, internalize it and then spend endless amounts of time thinking, oh, he's so stupid. Yeah, he was stupid, but it wasn't his fault, really. And the reaction was my fault. So Shantideva, in a way, makes it very simple, but it's huge what he's presenting to us. And then he goes on and says, a master who has hatred is in danger of being killed. Now, of course, he's talking about a completely different kind of culture and different kind of society. But, a person who is in charge of others, supposedly, and who has hatred, he says, he's in danger of being killed even by those who for their wealth and happiness depend upon his kindness. So in the context of Shantideva, even by his own servants, yeah, if he's filled with hatred. Yeah. So he's trying to point out really early in the piece, this quality of patience is terribly important because it actually protects us and it protects others at the same time. So I'll jump over now because there's a lot of verses in this chapter to verse 52, where he tries to encourage us to think about our own nature, so to speak, yeah, and to give us some practical ways of working with anger and developing patience. And so he says, since my mind, my chitta, my heart mind, is not physical, so notice he's not talking about my brain, yeah, but my chitta, my heart mind is not physical, in no way can anyone destroy it. Because we often react as though when someone says something critical or does something to us, we take it as though they can actually, physically affect us. And you remember there's that wonderful old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, you know, but words can never hurt me. Well, that's underlying this as well. You know? And he says, but through its being greatly attached to my body, that is the mind being attached to my body, it has caused harm through physical suffering. So when we encounter physical suffering, yeah, we can, so to speak, harm the heart and the mind because it will push it in a different direction, in a, if you like, an unskillful direction. So this is wonderful teaching. You know, just one verse would be enough to practice with for days. And then he goes on and says, since disrespect, harsh speech, and unpleasant words, yeah, the Buddha has a lot to say about this, do not cause any harm to my body, why, mind or chitta, do you become so angry? Yeah. So he says, you know, if you think about it, you know, people can say all sorts of things, but they're not actually injuring your body. So why does the mind allow itself to become so disturbed, so, if you like, injured and damaged by these words? And he goes on and says, because others will dislike me. So it's got to do with my image of myself and what others are saying about that image. Yeah, that's why I get disturbed and upset. So if we keep trying to practice in this way, keep trying to recognize that the words that are said by others, and indeed the actions of others, you know, can't, if we practice properly, they can't really affect the heart and the mind. You know, if we're practicing, trying to develop patience, then we can survive. Not only survive, but we can flourish, even with all these harsh words, criticisms, and so on, even in the face of anger and hatred from somebody else. Now, the Buddha, you'd remember, says to avoid clinging to praise and avoid shunning blame. Yeah. So he says, you know, everyone loves to be praised. Yeah. Well, of course, we like to hear nice things, you know, but none of us like to be blamed for things. Yeah? And the Buddha says, well, avoid both of them. Avoid praise, avoid blame. Don't cling to praise and don't push blame away. So again, it's encouraging us to kind of to adopt this middle ground, so to speak, this middle position where we're cultivating patience. Now, endurance is part of this as well, of course. Yeah, and that's in the next chapter in Shantideva's text. So I'd like to really encourage you to to make an effort to practice in this way, and pardon me. And now I'll jump over to verse 79. Yeah. I'm cutting pieces out, yeah, which I think are useful. It's all useful, but you know. In verse 77, he says, that joyous happiness of yours would be a source of joy, not something prohibited. A teaching given by the excellent ones, by the Buddhas, and a supreme means of assembling or drawing others in. Right? That is, if you can practice patience in this way, yeah, then you will actually develop a special kind of happiness. And that happiness can't be affected by what other people say or do to you. Yeah. But it fulfills the teaching of the Buddha, or the Buddhas in this case, and it helps others to be drawn to you if they can see that in you. Yeah, and that's one of the things I think people like Thich Nhat Hanh, you can see in him. Yeah, if you get to spend any time with him, or I think it's sort of beyond that now, but in the past, if you could spend time with him, you can see he does not react to things. It doesn't mean that he's kind of shut down or that he's somehow not human, but he doesn't react. You know? And even, you know, when small children do things, you know, that we might think, oh, it's very disruptive, and, you know, he just doesn't react to them, you know. He'll even sort of maybe encourage them or sort of, you know, draw them to himself rather than say, go and sit down and be quiet, you know, like an old school teacher or something. So in verse 79, then the Buddha goes, the Shantideva goes on and says, when people describe my own good qualities, I want others to be happy too. Yeah. This is really neat. So when people describe my own good qualities, I want others to be happy too. I want other people to be happy about my good qualities. Yeah. Tell me all about it. But then he says, but when they describe the good qualities of others, I don't want to be happy about it. Don't tell me about the good qualities of other people. Just tell me about mine. Sounds like Donald Trump, doesn't it, really? Quintessential. Maybe he'd read Shantideva and got stuck on that verse. So he's constantly warning us to be watching, to see, you know, what's actually arising, what's taking place within the body, the heart, the mind. And in a way, I think he's also encouraging us to keep it simple, you know, to not go rushing off. You know, today, Molly sent me a sutta and asked me a couple of questions about it. And the whole thrust of that sutta was the Buddha saying to this monk who was making statements about, pardon me, the nature of the Buddha after death and so on. And what the Buddha was really saying was, look, stop all of that. You know, stop all that speculating and thinking in that sort of way with the manipulative mind or the controlling mind, and just get on with it and do it. And he finishes that sutta by saying, I just teach suffering and its causes. Yeah. So forget about all the other stuff. Just keep it simple. Who was it said it's the economy, stupid? Was it Bill Clinton? Somebody like that said it's the economy, stupid. Well, the Buddha says it's suffering, stupid. Yeah, and it's the ending of suffering. So I think at that point, I'll leave Shantideva for you to explore for yourself. And you might think again or go back to the Maha Rahula Awada Sutta and read the Buddha's teaching to Rahula, and encourage yourself to practice in that way, you know, to try to develop, to try to cultivate patience, but to recognize that there's only one place to do it. That's here in this body, this heart, this mind. And what's the time to do it? The time to do it's now. Yeah. And especially when you're doing meditation practice, to be practicing patience with yourself and sometimes with others. You know, if you've all, excuse me, you've all been on retreats and you know what it can be like in the meditation sala or hall. There are people scratching around, and there's always someone who's got a bad cough. There's always someone who's going like this, always. Yeah. And there are always people who go, yeah. So instead of practicing, they're sitting there thinking, I'm going to kill that person. You know, why? And then the whole story starts. Why do they come in here? If they got a cold, they should stay outside. Yeah. If they can't sit still, why are they in here? You know, why are they moving around? And so all the moving around happens here. Yeah. So it's very important to try to practice in that very, very simple, very direct way, and to recognize that, okay, if I'm going to try to cultivate patience, which will lead to upekkha, which will lead to equanimity. Yeah. So, okay, I told you, my teacher, when I used to go to my teacher and complain, not that I did very often, but occasionally, you know, at one time I was living in a kuti next door to, there were actually I think 4 kuttis, and they were all built literally up against each other. Yeah? And the monk next to me on one side had a television set. And he used to watch, in those days in Thailand, the government changed this because in those days you could watch Thai boxing all day. Yeah, all day. The government actually brought a law out and they changed it so that it could only have a few hours a day because people, that's all they would do, be sitting around watching boxing. And this particular monk, who was very nice, yeah, but that's all he did. And he would have all the Dekwat, all the kids who lived in the monastery, they'd all be in there. Yeah. So it would all be, you know, like this all the time, you know. So that was on one side. And on the other side was a monk who had a radio, right? But the radio wasn't too bad until his cousin, who had a theatre in town, brought him a speaker that was about the size of that door, right? And set it up in his room and connected the radio to it. So if you didn't have the boxing on one side, you had the local radio station, and it was loud enough so that the floor that you slept on, because we slept on the floor on a little mat, the floor would actually shake and vibrate from this. So I remember going to my teacher and saying to him, "Oh, I'm having a bit of trouble, you know, it's very hard to meditate with the TV there and the radio there, you know." And his response was very simple. Go back and just get on with your practice. Yeah. Now, he did, to be fair to him, he did go and speak to them, but it didn't last long. You know, it lasted maybe a couple of days, and then it was all back again, you know, the chayo and the boxing and the radio and all the rest of it. But that was his instruction. Just go back and get on with your practice. And really, you know, it was the best advice he could have given, you know, because otherwise we're constantly, everything has to be perfect according to what we think is perfect. No noise, no this, no that, you know. So developing patience is terribly important, you know. And I know it's important because I have such trouble with it myself. Yeah. So you just got to keep trying. You just got to, you know, keep on keeping on, so to speak, and make an effort with it. And when you become impatient with yourself, then, okay, you try to, again, go back to those teachings, go back to Shantideva, go back to the Maharula Awada Sutta, remind yourself of that little encounter that Ananda had with the Buddha, where the Buddha says to him, "Your questions are very vexatious to me. You know, your questions are driving me crazy." Because we can be doing that while we're also supposedly doing our meditation practice. So we might pause for just a few moments. We might stop for any questions or comments, but we'll keep them short and then we'll do a meditation practice. Yeah, because last week we did meditation practice and then questions and comments. And so I'd rather keep the questions and comments short and then do some meditation practice to finish, if that's okay. Justine.
You know how we talk about near enemy environments, certain qualities? So it seems like anger is the what would you say is the near enemy?
Oh gosh, I've forgotten now because they're all set out in Buddhaghosa. Yeah, so the far enemy and the near enemy. It's called aging. Not being able to remember them. Give me a minute; it might come back. I'll send the little dog down the hole to bring back the answer.
Yeah.
Near enemy, far enemy.
It could be something like, you know, when you pretend you're being patient, like you really are still feeling a lot of irritation or aversion, but you're pushing that down,
yeah,
so that you can remain calm and, you know, carry on.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the opposite of being patient with yourself, because it's ignoring how you actually feel.
Yeah.
Sort of a denial.
Yeah.
You know, like just pretending, oh look, if I just keep going for long enough, things will, you know, this person will get better.
Yeah.
When, you know, they may not change at all, or they may continue doing what they're doing. Yeah, and you get stuck in tolerating something rather than acknowledging what's really happening.
Yeah.
And allowing something to shift and change.
Yeah.
You're changing your own behaviour, actually.
And very often the other person can tell. I think very often the other person can, even though you don't actually say something, the other person could tell what's going on or what's just beneath the surface. Yeah. The same with speech. You know, you can say something to someone that you're very, very annoyed with, but you're not saying that you're annoyed with them, but they can tell. Yeah. You might even say something nice to them, but they can tell. Yeah. And you can tell too when it's reversed. Yeah. 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 So anything else? Frank?
About the 4 elements. Trying walking meditation, 1 hour, 2 hours. I guarantee that after 2.5 hours, serious walking meditation, we will experience the elements much easier than sitting and imagining water and earth, and because the body will become the 4 elements. It's very hard to explain, but we have to do 2.5 hours at least. I'm speaking from experience.
Yeah.
Once in what Buddha done, I was doing it for well over 2 hours. And then, like a ship on the sea, just like that, the moon, and couldn't lift legs because they were like 100 weight. That was the earth. So ever since when I had this experience and reading about the 4 elements, I know that they are us. I am the 4 elements.
Thank you, Frank. Good. Okay, well, we do some practice. Yeah. So let's take the advice of the Buddha and take the advice of Shantideva when we do this practice together this evening. So first of all, just let yourself sit. Yeah. Don't be thinking, oh, now I'm going to do meditation practice or I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. First of all, just let yourself sit. Let yourself settle. Even this very, very simple instruction is an opportunity to litmus test your patience. Because there's a natural tendency, okay, yeah, I'm sitting, what's next? So we simply sit, let the body find its own centeredness, its own relaxation. Just allow the body to settle. And if we do that, then the heart and mind will begin to settle. So just allowing that settling to take place. And you can be aware of the tendency for the heart and mind to want to move off in different directions. To want to start finding other things, more interesting things, more attractive things. things that the heart and mind can engage with. Instead of just the experience of bodily presence. So you're not concentrating on the body. You're just sitting with that gentle awareness of it as it settles. As the tightness and tiredness and tension slowly begin to unravel, slowly begin to dissolve. And perhaps you can be aware of the breathing which is taking place. Not focusing on it, not concentrating on it, simply being aware of it. And notice I said the breathing which is taking place, not my breathing. Just the air element. Flowing into the earth element of the body. The warmth of the body being the fire element. The water element, all through the body, and even in respiration itself. And the space element within the body and all around the body. So just resting into this experience of the elements. The elements flowing in and on and around each other, coalescing. So it's not my breath, it's just breathing. just very gently and very simply try to let yourself be aware of any small irritation that might be present or that might be arising, any small annoyance, any small aversion. And simply trying to rest, supporting it, allowing it to come up, allowing it to pass away. Not suppressing, not grasping. If there are things being turned over within the heart and the mind, again, don't suppress them, don't try and block them, don't try to control them, simply supporting them, allowing them to come into being and allowing them to pass away again. So that your experience of practice does become more and more spacious and vast and open, like the earth, like the water, like the air. So that you enter effortlessly more deeply into your practice. Thoughts can begin to fall away. Patience can begin to arise, allowing whatever is present. No criticizing, no blaming, no judging, no preferring this or that. Just this deep, broad, vast spaciousness. Make your practice like the earth. For whatever is thrown upon the earth, whatever people do on the earth does not react. So now is the time and now is the place to be practicing with patience. Just sitting with patience, allowing equanimity to unfold. Resting into the body, resting into the breath, patiently supporting whatever arises, whatever passes away. As you end your practice, just make a little dedication. May the effort that I've made in this practice be of great benefit and blessing to myself, to those I'm practicing with, and to all suffering sentient beings. May I and all beings be well and happy. May we be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May we know real happiness and the causes of happiness. May we come quickly to the complete liberation of heart and mind, which is Nibbana. So we've hardly scratched the surface on this topic of patience. So I just encourage you to pursue it yourself. Try to read the suttas about it. Try to read Shantideva about it. There's also a very nice piece in one of Thich Nhat Hanh's books. I think it's his book on anger, and he has quite a lot to say about patience. Yeah, so that would be another good place to start. But above all, to try to practice it when you're actually trying to practice meditation. And Justine, I'm sorry, I'm still waiting for the dog to come back. Somebody else might be able to answer your question. There was a time before this body and mind began to collapse when I could have answered it like that. But that's long past. Anyone remember? Each of the Brahma Viharas has a near and a far enemy. Yeah. No? Nobody? Any?
The near enemy of equanimity is that kind of cold detachment.
Okay, yeah. But what about what's the near enemy for loving kindness or metta? Never mind. It'll come back. It'll probably come back in bed tonight. Suddenly, oh, there it is. Oh dear. Anyway, that's what happens when you've got a body. So we might finish there. Say goodnight to the Zoomers. Those that have stayed awake. And then these talks will continue. We've got lots of good teachers. Meredith has organised lots of really good teachers. You've had really good ones in the few weeks previous, and there'll be more to follow. I think, where's Meredith? Winton Higgins is the next one, isn't he? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that should be a really good Dhamma talk. Yeah. So anyway, if you get the newsletter, you'll see who's teaching, what they're teaching on, and so on in future. So we might finish there. Yeah, I'll just do a little blessing to finish. Yatha varivahapura paripurenti sagarang ewang mewang itodinang petanang upakapati chitang patitang tunghang kipameva samijatu sabe purentu sankapa jantopanara soyata mani jatira soyata Sapityo haviva chanto saparoko vinasatuma te bhavan vantarayo sukiti kayoko avaviva tanasili sanichang utang pachayino jat Taro Dhamma Vatanti Ayuwano Sukhang Balang bhavatu sapamangalang rakantu sabha devata sabha bhuta nubhavena sada sohoti bhavan bhavatu sapamangalang rakantu sabha devata sabha dhamma nubhavena sada sohoti bhavantu te bhavatu sapamangalang rakantu sabha devata Sabha Sankanu Bhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te. So thank you, Meredith. Have you switched off?
Questions?
Very good.